Hello, and welcome to this week's lecture on gender. I'm Kathy Shepard-Jones, and I'll be leading our discussion on this topic. So what are we going to cover here? Well, we will look at some United States demographics to start off with. We'll also talk about some different scenarios and look at some different styles of communication. Then we're going to consider employment statistics. That will lead us into a discussion of health issues and longevity differences between genders. And we'll wrap up with a little bit of research that has implications for counseling for both men and women. As we discuss gender, perhaps a good starting point to consider for us in the United States is to consider how the numbers stack up. Our 2010 census data show that the U.S. population is now 3,008,745,538 people. Of these people, 151,781,326 are male, and 156,964,212 are female. This translates into 49.2% males and 50.8% females. It's noteworthy to mention that this does represent a slight closing of the gender gap of 0.1% since the 2000 census. But what does gender mean really? How does gender influence one's day-to-day living? Again, this is where we must remember that when we talk about this aspect of diversity, we are speaking in some degree of generality. And we must remember that gender is again only one component of diversity. To better understand diversity, we must remember that people's positionalities, or influence of the interaction of various components of diversity, including gender, are of great significance to the study of diversity. Okay, so for a moment, we'll strip away everything else to more closely examine gender differences. Let's look at a couple of scenarios. Here is scenario 1. Let's read and think about it for a moment. A married couple was in a car when the wife turned to her husband and asked, "Would you like to stop for a coffee?" "No, thanks," he answered truthfully. So they didn't stop. So what do you think was the result? The wife, who indeed wanted to stop, became annoyed because she felt that her preference had not been considered. The husband, seeing his wife angry, became frustrated. Why didn't she just say what she wanted? This is an example of communication style differences that many of us may be familiar with. Does this strike a chord with you? Now let's take a look at another scenario. Eve is meeting with her boss, Mark, to go over details about a presentation Mark is scheduled to do at an afternoon meeting. During the conversation, Eve mentions to Mark that she isn't feeling well. "When we're finished here, just go on home or call your doctor," Mark absentmindedly says. "Well, I'm not contagious," Eve exclaims, "and you might even notice that I'm not dead yet." Mark is bewildered and confused about Eve's outburst. He doesn't know what to say next. Do you have an idea of what this scenario is trying to convey? Why is Eve upset with her boss? Do you think that she wanted to go home? Or did she want her boss to listen to her and perhaps tell her that he was sorry she didn't feel well? This scenario shows the male is trying to solve the problem while the female is wanting to be heard. I think we can put this in context of male and female talking about how their day went. The woman tells about something bad that happened at work, and the man offers suggestions for fixing the problem. Can you think of similar examples within your own personal or professional experiences that remind you of either or both of these scenarios? Let's talk for a few minutes about gender roles. In this Family Circus cartoon, the little boy, I think his name is Jeffy, is pulling on his dad's coat as they're heading down an aisle at the store. And he says, "That's the doll aisle, Daddy. Somebody might see us." This follows one of the very stereotypical gender roles that children were historically and traditionally expected to adhere to in U.S. culture. So think about what lessons you take away from your own childhood. Were there specific toys or games that you were expected to play with? Was it different depending on whether you were a girl or a boy? Were there differences between the way that little girls were supposed to act versus little boys? I think that if we look at generations, we find some differences in the degree of difference that we find by gender. The differences in expectations for little boys versus little girls were more apparent as we go further back. Today, lots of little girls play team sports. Lots of little girls spend time outside, dig for worms, play with Matchbox cars or Legos, and get dirty like little boys. Likewise, lots of little boys do play with dolls, not just G.I. Joes, like to cook, read, or play quietly inside. However, we should also note that there are still discrepancies in education for boys and girls. Girls aren't expected to achieve in math and science, and we have seen achievement gaps in this area. So we can't say that we've erased all of the differences between genders for children in the United States. It's also interesting to think about the things that you learned in childhood now that you're an adult. In your workplace, are these lessons relevant to gender as experienced by yourself or your colleagues? Over the past few decades, Americans have made great strides in accepting and adjusting to new definitions of gender roles. Part of the cause is the increased number of women in the workplace. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, white men who once dominated the workplace now account for about 45% of all workers. White women and women of color make up 47% of the workplace. So we're seeing some real equity between genders in terms of who is in the workforce. The percent of women in the workforce has been steadily on the rise. With the increased presence of women in the workplace, old attitudes and behaviors have had to change. Men and women are more aware of sexual harassment than previously, whereas 20 years ago, a woman who refused to have an affair with her boss may have had to quit. She now has other options. Companies are now experimenting with policies that are family friendly, such as flex time, job sharing, and on-site childcare. It's important to recognize that these are policies that benefit both men and women. Are you familiar with the statistics that say that women earn 80 cents versus every dollar earned from men? This is up from 62 cents on the dollar that was reported in 1979. And this information is from a report of the U.S. Department of Labor that was released in 2010. The earnings that they report show that the median weekly earnings for women are $657, while they are $819 a week for men. We also find that women who are older do earn more, but this happens around age 55 to 64. For men, the highest level of earnings begin earlier, right around 45. And remember, men are still earning more than women across the board, but it's just a matter that men are increasing their earnings at a younger age than women are. If we look at age on the lower end of the spectrum, we find that the earnings gap is much smaller. For 16 to 24-year-olds, women are $424 a week and men are $458. It's still a gap, but it is a much smaller one. In fact, women from 25 to 34 years old earn 89% that of their male counterparts. If we look at positionality or impact different components of diversity have on earnings, we see further differences emerge. Asian men earn more than white, African American, or Hispanic men. And Asian women also earn more than white, African American, or Hispanic women. The discrepancy in wages between genders were the largest between whites and Asians. Whites was 79% and Asians 82%. Remember that what I'm saying here is that the discrepancy between men and women, or again, Asian women, are making 82 cents versus $1 earned by Asian men. Another point made by this Department of Labor report is that inflation-adjusted wages increased significantly for women over 30 years. Earnings growth for women far outpaced that of men. White men had only 3% growth. African American men had no growth, and Hispanic men's earnings decreased. Shifting gears here, I also want to share with you some general differences in terms of communication styles, as studied by researcher Deborah Tannen. Tannen found that men tend to talk more than women in a public setting. However, in the home, women talk more than men. She also found that women make eye contact and face each other more directly. Men, on the other hand, tend to look away from each other. Do you think this is true? I think that we also must keep other aspects of culture in mind when we talk about eye contact. When we speak of verbal communication, men will tend to discuss a variety of topics, while women will maintain the same topic for greater length of time. In terms of those nonverbal attending skills sorts of things, women will participate in them much more than men will. Men will listen silently. Let's remember that for counselors, those attending skills are important for men and women. Tannen here talks about attending noises, so maybe men are nodding, they just aren't saying mm-hmm. The final point here is that women are more likely to express their agreement and support, and men will debate an idea more. This ties into the notion that men are more focused on independence and status. Meanwhile, women are focusing on connectedness and intimacy in communication. I think these are interesting things to think about, and this research is used largely in the workplace. It may help to shed some light on ideas around team building. It also has implications for communication or miscommunications in relationships. Keep in mind, this is one line of approach to communication. There are researchers that feel that there are not distinct differences in communication between men and women. Again, there is no 100% answer to much of anything in social sciences. So now let's talk about gender and health. This is some additional data related to women employment. What we find is that working women in the service sector make less than men. Women also are more likely to have part-time jobs. Women also find that their work trajectory gets put on hold because of family situations. What does that mean? Often it means that women are having the babies. That's sort of just the way it works, right? And sometimes having the baby then stretches out to waiting until the baby is old enough to go to preschool or school. And that can also be a factor leading to part-time employment, where the mother may be in the workforce part-time and the child is in school or the child care for part of the mother's workday. The next bullet, women experience high demand and low control conditions at work. What does this mean? Well, it means that someone else is in control. which again fits in with the notion that women are less likely to be in positions of leadership in employment situations. So these are all reasons that can impact health status for women. It influences what women do when they get sick, how they're responded to in the healthcare system, and how work health programs are developed. So if you're working at a job that's demanding, that may have bad hours, that may require you to run from work to picking up the children, the ability to get to the doctor during office hours. And additionally, if you're in a part-time job that doesn't offer you benefits, your access to health care is not going to be the same. So this in turn means that women are experiencing more out-of-pocket costs for health care and medications, right? It also means that getting to health promotion programs or screenings is going to be more difficult or completely inaccessible. Why? Well, women also experience more of the responsibilities around children. And this next one's kind of interesting. If a woman is working at home as a homemaker, she's also exposed to household cleaning agents that are toxic or dangerous. Women also find themselves sandwiched in child care responsibilities, along with issues related to aging family members as well. When we add in stresses from a job, there's often scarce little time left for anything else. And the anything else are the things that can be most beneficial. The things like exercise and activity, time for healthy practices like cooking healthy foods, and we're all probably familiar with the pitfalls of unhealthy eating though, right? When you're busy, what's a really easy way to eat that's often gratifying and a pleasant experience? Well, takeout food, drive-through food. Somebody else cooks it. And maybe you treat yourself with something that tastes good. The double cheeseburger and fries, because you're working hard. You're hungry, you're tired, you earn the right to have something that makes you happy, right? Not to mention the fact that fast food is usually cheap food. And the dollar menu doesn't usually include the healthy stuff. See, but even this is a generalization that I'm making. Because if you have the gumption to really think about it, there are healthy choices that can be made even in fast food. But in general, we don't always make the best, most health-conscious decisions in a rush. According to data from 2009, as reported by the Centers for Disease Control, there are gender differences found for sexually transmitted diseases. It's found that males had 5.6 times the reported syphilis rate as women. There was no statistically significant difference in rates of gonorrhea, and the rate of chlamydia was 2.7 times higher for women than men. According to the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, men play an important part in the health of their families, but often do not take care of their own health, often avoiding preventive care. Men have higher work-related deaths and have higher suicide rates. Men, in fact, have higher rates of death by various diseases than women pretty much across the board, with one notable exception: Alzheimer's. Of interest here is the fact that the number one killer for both men and women is heart disease. We also know that there is a difference in life expectancy based on gender, right? Women live longer overall by about 5 years. The life expectancy for women in the United States is approximately 80.4 years, while it is 75.2 years for men. If we drill down and consider other variables, we find that the life expectancy for African American men is even lower at 69.8 years. Males also experience higher rates of infant mortality and higher rates of developmental disabilities. And at the other end of the lifespan, if we consider things like hip fractures in older adults, we find that women are more likely to recover from that injury and men are more likely to die. So we're seeing a genetic component to differences here. But we must also consider differences based on behaviors as well. In general, men are seen as bigger risk takers and participate in more risky behaviors. As I mentioned earlier, men work more often in higher risk kinds of jobs that lead to work-related injuries or death. Men are more likely to have an accidental death, to drink more alcohol, and less likely to use sunscreen or to wear seatbelts. Men are also more likely to be victims of murder. So we need to consider some of these behaviors and how other factors may be playing a part in behaviors. It's believed that men are often undiagnosed for depression, and the depression is therefore not being treated, leading to these risky behaviors. Some psychologists believe that these issues go back to the family structure and the expectations that were placed on boys. What are some of the things that little boys may be told? You have to be a man and be strong, or you have to figure things out for yourself. Don't ask for help. Recent studies do hold this to be the case. A large meta-analysis of over 5,000 college students showed that women were more likely to seek counseling than males across all racial groups. Keep in mind that this meta-analysis looked at students, so it's also skewing toward younger ages and may appear different for other generations. It does, however, hold up the line of thinking that men are societally conditioned to be independent and tough, that men need to resolve issues on their own and should maintain a facade that's difficult to read. When we combine this with the knowledge that men experience depression that goes untreated and that men have a higher suicide rate than women, we must use our knowledge to provide a counseling environment that's going to encourage participation by men. So in terms of what we need to think about as far as implications for rehabilitation counseling, keep in mind that the counseling environment may present some additional barriers to men. In terms of women in counseling, we've talked about some of the social, societal, and economic issues faced by women, and the fact that women are more often in employment roles that do not provide the same economic leverage or job status as men. And the disparities become even more evident when we include racial and ethnic positionalities as well. It's been noted that 20% of female students have been abused by a date. We know that discrimination in the workplace exists, and that women are often sexually harassed on the job. These issues have led to increased emphasis on policy improvements on the job, but nonetheless lead to depression or development of coping strategies that are not always beneficial, such as drugs and alcohol. When we talk about stereotypes around the portrayal of women, the media has given our society in the United States a very clear image of what is desirable in a woman and what is the perfect body. These expectations are unrealistic, unhealthy, and largely unattainable. In fact, research has shown that over a third of women have eating disorders, more occurring at younger ages. So what does this mean for counseling? Well, for one, it means that counselors must be well aware of the biological, psychological, and sociological issues that affect women. It also means that counselors need to recognize limitations and advantages of various counseling techniques. For example, Freudian psychotherapy may be contraindicated. However, other techniques may provide great opportunity to explore social messages that women receive, such as cognitive therapies. Analysis of gender roles and gender expectations, both perceived and actual, can be helpful. Truly, this approach can be beneficial with men as well in gaining insight about the counseling process. Because of high rates of physical and sexual abuse for women, assessing for abuse is also of utmost importance. And particularly with women, providing referral or employing training around assertiveness or consciousness raising can be very beneficial. So I'm hoping that you've gained some insights here into some possible gender differences. It's yet one more piece of diversity and another fascinating facet that makes us who we are. I'd like you to go ahead and take a little test now. It's an ongoing study at Harvard called Project Implicit. I've listed the website in the presentation, and it's also available in your course materials. There are a variety of tests that are available at the site, but today you should choose the Gender Career IAT. It only takes a few minutes and will provide your results at the end of the test. So, that is the end of this lecture. Please go ahead and make sure that you review the readings that are related to gender as well. Thank you.